I will speak at the end. Okay?
Good afternoon, everybody. So, as Lesley said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Teach and Read program and also why, as a pediatrician, literacy is so important to us. To begin with, let me tell you kind of a typical case that we'll see. I work over at Eric B. Chandler Health Center. So we have a 3-year-old boy who comes in for a health check, and we always do a developmental surveillance or developmental screen, asking them where they are in their development. And his mom tells you he speaks about maybe 15 to 20 words. He can understand when you tell him to, come over here and bring a book. So he understands what you're saying for the most part. But when you ask him, so when I interact with him, I ask him, what's your name? He doesn't really know how to answer that. Or I ask him how old he is. He can't do that either. You ask the mom a little bit more, because it raises some red flags, and you find that, what happens during the day with him. And mom's at home, so mom's stay-at-home mom. And during the day, he watches a lot of cartoons, and mom's very adamant with all educational stuff, Baby Einstein or Sesame Street, all educational shows, about 3 hours a day. And then other time, he also plays educational games on his tablet, so the Leapfrog or LeapPad, all those. He does that for about an hour a day when mom's cooking. She doesn't read to him at night. She says because he just won't sit still, and he doesn't seem interested because he's always looking around or, won't sit there for the entire story. So this is kind of a classic case. And the reason I bring this up, because what you see a lot of times is children from low-income groups, especially minority backgrounds, are higher risk for developmental delays and especially low literacy. So have you guys ever heard of the 30 million word gap? So there was a study done, I think it was in Kansas or Kentucky, where they looked at all different familial households, and they looked at households with lower income and households from middle income and households from higher income. And they found by the age of 3, children who came from higher socioeconomic status had 30 million more words than kids from lower socioeconomic status. So think about this when they enter kindergarten, the huge word gap difference. And then there's other studies that kind of back that up. So another study from Hernandez in 2012 showed that kids from minority backgrounds are less likely to be proficient readers by the end of 3rd grade, less likely to graduate, and then also at risk for poor educational achievement as well. That being said, there's also something called what we call ACEs, and Dr. Jimenez is actually the lead author on this study. So it's adverse childhood experiences. Have you guys ever heard of this term either? So it's basically kids who've been exposed to a lot of different things, whether it's been exposed to domestic violence, parental drug abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, any of those things. So the more that they're exposed to these things, especially before the age of 5, the higher risk they are for literacy issues, social problems, and attention problems. So all those things compounded that we may see more in children who live in poverty, that is going to increase their risk for cognitive impairment as well as increased diseases and then earlier death as well. So that's why it's important for us as pediatricians to address this issue. That being said, it's really important for us as pediatricians to talk to the parents about reading with their child, so shared reading. Again, more studies have shown that a lot of reading with your young child increase in their higher scores for developmental outcomes. And unfortunately, children from minority backgrounds are less likely to be read to daily, just because, again, a lot of misconceptions that they're not paying attention, so they're not interested. Or you give them, a lot of times I'll give a 6-month-old a book, they'll put it in their mouth, see they're not interested, is what the parents' perception is of that. And another study found that parents who were primarily Spanish-speaking were 4 times likely of never reading to their child. So the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is our overlying organization, which kind of helps guide us as pediatricians in terms of different recommendations. So the AAP came out with a policy statement on literacy promotion. So the things that they had recommended is, again, for you guys this may seem like common sense, but for us as pediatricians, it just kind of reinforced the fact that these are what we should be telling our families. That we should be advising parents to read aloud to their child. It strengthens bonds between the parent and the child. It increases the bonding. And also it instills early literacy skills and language skills because they're hearing you speak. And I always tell my families, it doesn't matter what language you speak. I try to actually stress that they speak their native language. They're going to learn English in school anyway. But it doesn't matter. Just speaking to them is going to make a huge difference in what they're exposed to. And then talk about shared reading. So, explain to that 3-year-old, the mom of the 3-year-old, that, yeah, he may not listen to the whole story, but incorporate into your routine. And you're going to find that he kind of gets into the habit. He's going to want to read that one book over and over again, which is wonderful. Or the 6-month-old may not, again, want to put the book in their mouth the entire time, but that's okay. But just kind of getting them into that routine and exposing them to the written words and exposing them to language. So as pediatricians, they also recommend that we provide books for all the well child visits. I'll talk a little bit more about that, especially for higher risk and lower income children. And then the other thing that the AAP recommended is that we partner with policymakers and try to advocate for early literacy and early childhood education as well. That being said, Reach Out and Read, and actually we're fortunate enough to have the president of the Rutgers Reach Out and Read, Brittany, here today. And she actually works at, volunteers at Chandler and kind of helps with the Reach Out and Read program and reads the children that are there as well. So Reach Out and Read program, I'm curious if any of you guys have ever heard of the Reach Out and Read program. So the Reach Out and Read program was founded in 1989 in Boston City Hospital. It was by a group of pediatricians and early childhood educators. So together, they kind of, I think the way it started, correct me if I'm wrong, Manny, is that they looked in the waiting room, they had books in the waiting room, and the books kept on disappearing from the waiting room. And, they're saying, and after a while, they realized all the patients were taking them. And they said, look, our patients want these books, we should give the books to them. And it's a good thing that they want these books. They want to kind of bring a library to their own home. So out of that came out the Reach Out and Read program, and it's basically now, it has spread to over 5,000 clinical sites. And there's evidence behind it. It's not just about giving out books. So there's about more than 15 studies that show that Reach Out and Read is very effective in changing these ACEs that we talked about, right? So even though these kids might be exposed to ACEs, it's been effective in terms of preventing a lot of those long-term outcomes. So a study in 1991 showed that parents who are given books were likely to read aloud to the child at home. So kind of overcoming, the other statistics I read, which I explained earlier. Parents that read aloud to their kids 3 or more times a week are 10 times higher for families in the Reach Out and Read program. So the kids who are getting the Reach Out and Read books are being read to a lot more. They score higher on language assessment, and children in the Reach Out and Read program score higher than peers in vocabulary tests. So, we talk about the 30 million word gap, so this kind of decreases that word gap. So the Reach Out and Read program, just a little bit more about the logistics. So we give out books starting at their well child visits at 6 months. So every well child visit they get a 6-month, 9-month, 12-month, 15, 18, 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, and 5 years old. So if you count that up, that's about 9 books. So by the time they start kindergarten, they have a library of 9 books. And the books, the way they're separated is that we have, for the younger kids, we have board books, but they also have like faces on them, right, for the 6 to 12-month-olds. So it's very age appropriate. And then as they get older, we have, for the older 5-year-olds, we'll have like pictured books. So it's very much divided, which is age appropriate. And also in our clinic setting, we have bilingual books. We have a significant Spanish-speaking population. So as another thing, we always encourage our families to read to them. And the other part of that is I have patients who are illiterate, the parents who are illiterate. So I said it does not make a difference. If you can read or not read, make up a story. And just kind of get into the habit of opening up a book and that shared reading. So shared reading could be not necessarily reading the words, is what I explained to the family, but just kind of going through the motions of making a story or telling a story. And this is some of the milestones of early literacy development. I'm sure you guys are much more familiar with this than we are, but talking about what they can do from their motor standpoint and then how to guide them in terms of reading. So for example, for 6 to 12 months, like I talked about, if they can hold your head steady in their lap, they're sitting in their lap while you read a book, and then the guidance, you can talk to them, tell the parents to sing to them, read to them, point at different things, and then what kind of books they should be reading at that age. And for the 1 to 2 years of age, rhyming books are good, board books, books that name things. We have a lot of those books in our center right now. And then between the 2 and 3 years old, their fine motor movement has greatly improved, so they're able to turn pages. And be more interactive. Rhyming books are always great. I know my kids always love the rhyming books because it kind of stays in their heads and like the routine of that. And books that tell stories now. So now you can kind of transition to that a little bit more. And then 3 to 4 books. So now the kid can turn the pages a little bit better. They're going to be drawing more and listening for longer stories. So they should be able to kind of get into that habit now. So again, longer stories, and then also the counting and alphabet books for at this age. And then finally, 4 to 5. So now the kids are able to write a little bit more, maybe recognize a few more letters, recognize colors more. So now you can talk about all the fairy tale books, longer stories, and less pictures. So they don't need as many pictures to engage them. So another thing what we do as So the way as pediatricians, we incorporate the Reach Out and Read program is that when we go in for the well-child visit, as a pediatrician, we go in with the book. So the thought behind that is that we're coming in with the book as a prescription. Just like we give prescriptions for antibiotics or other things, same thing with books. And then, we'll give the book, and it's interesting to see how each parent and child interact with the book. Some kids will take the book and just throw it on the floor, and they'll stay on the floor for the whole visit. But you will have parents who take the book, and then right away the kid's eyes light up. They're looking at the book. It might be upside down, like this happened yesterday. A kid was looking at the book upside down, was loving the book, and turning the pages. The kid was on the mom's lap. The mom was looking at it and talking about it with her. So you can see a huge difference in this. But sometimes, like I said, sometimes the mom will just take the book and put it away, or the kid puts it in her mouth and she grabs it out of the mouth and saying, don't put in your mouth. So then I'll tuck the book and I'll kind of model to the family, saying, oh, it's okay that she's putting her book in her mouth. So, I'll say, look at this book, and I'll just read it to them. And you can see how the kid's engaged. And, you kind of see that the mom is saying, realizing that, oh, my kid is interested in reading. And then at the end, a lot of times I just talk about, if I'm talking about sleep training and this and that, I say always incorporate reading as part of the routine and kind of incorporate, kind of tie everything together at the end. And it's, it takes 2 minutes. A lot of times there are complaints amongst pediatricians that we just don't have time. We're talking about vaccines, we're talking about injury prevention, we're talking about nutrition. So reading is just one more thing, but I feel very strongly, and many of my colleagues the same way, that just makes such a difference in how the kids do in terms of their language development, their school, and just, huge, and parent and child bonding as well. And the other thing we do have is also Reach Out and Read prescriptions that we'll give out once in a while as well, especially the ones that aren't reading as much as their kids. So just talking about the importance of reading and say read 15 minutes every day to your child, 7 days a week. And you hope that's kind of what they're doing, just like we give any other prescriptions out. And finally, when you're talking about this, it kind of brings out other issues. Like I said, one of my families, when I started talking about reading, they talked about how the mom, she said she can't read. And I said, that's okay. And actually, I was able to kind of connect her with reading literacy services for her to learn how to read. But it kind of opens up this partnership. So we're not just, you hope that the parents don't perceive it as me just saying, read, 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 this is what you do, this is what you do. But mom also explaining what's going on in their lives and kind of working together and realizing that we're all there to kind of better the child and and optimize the child's health. That being said, I'm going to ask Dr. Jimenez to come and talk about the research behind all this.
I'll try to be as.
Sorry about that.
So I'm just going to, as Shilpa mentioned, I'm just going to walk through a few of the research projects that we've been so fortunate to collaborate with Lesley on. Speaking, I think for both Shilpa and I think we've learned a ton from Lesley. It's been such a pleasure to collaborate with her. So in addition to the study that Shilpa mentioned, where we looked at adverse childhood experiences and associations between early school readiness skills, we've also been working to understand what it's like to implement the literacy guidelines that Shilpa had mentioned earlier. So I'm sure in the education world you can relate to organizations creating sort of best practice guidelines, and then it's thrown out to the community, and how it gets implemented is always a big question. So we tried to understand that. One of our pediatric residents took the lead on this project. So our goal was really to examine attitudes regarding literacy promotion among pediatric primary care providers here in New Jersey, and what they're actually doing currently with regards to literacy promotion in their offices. So it was a cross-sectional survey, and we took a random sample of 500 pediatricians who practice in New Jersey. We used the AMA master file, which is actually probably the most complete sort of inventory of practicing physicians. You don't have to be a member of the AMA to actually track you once you graduate medical school. They do a pretty good job, actually. So we excluded any non-primary care providers, given that the literacy promotion guidelines were really targeted towards primary care. And it was a 23-item survey, mostly using Likert scale type questions, and then also 2 open-ended questions to assess barriers in a free text way. So then we used descriptive statistics to summarize attitudes and knowledge. We also tested the hypothesis about years since training and comfort and reported adequacy of their training and literacy promotion. So we had 132 pediatricians respond, so about 22%. which actually for physician surveys isn't terrible. And the median time out of training was about 20 years. The majority of the practice in the group setting, which really does actually reflect what things are like in New Jersey, and about 59% accepted Medicaid, which is right on about what we would expect for the broader sample. So as you can see from this slide, and unfortunately the print's a little bit small, but in general the pediatricians really agreed or showed favorable attitudes towards literacy promotion. So the vast majority agreed with the statement literacy promotion is an essential aspect of pediatric practice. As a pediatrician, I feel responsible for promoting literacy among my patients. What's interesting is actually less, though, felt that they were adequately trained to promote literacy development among their patients. And so while it's still a majority of, when we looked at current practice, while it's still a majority actually were engaging in literacy, or saying that they conducted activities to promote early literacy, it was less than we would expect based on the attitudes. And then only about a quarter actually participated in the Reach Out and Read program, which again, sort of thinking about where Reach Out and Read actually has its broadest reach, it typically is in low-income communities. And you know, the majority of pediatricians are actually suburban practice here in New Jersey. So, and then when we looked at across years of training, so pediatricians who were less than 20 years out of training were more likely to report feeling adequately trained to engage in literacy promotion. And so, and what's interesting about that figure actually, so Reach Out and Read, although it was founded in 1989, really sort of took off beginning in around 2000. And I'll share some in a few slides some of the work that we're also doing to understand sort of literacy education among residents. But the Reach Out and Read really does play a critical role in literacy promotion education. So it actually makes some sense. So sort of what we took away from this work was that nearly all the pediatricians agree that literacy promotion was important, but there's still a gap in terms of helping pediatricians to actually accomplish that in practice. And so really understanding how to facilitate implementation of literacy promotion is still something that we need to really work on. And so it's actually a nice nail for the hammers that we have, or the other projects that we're working on. One project that is funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that Lesley's been extremely helpful with is working to use different technologies to actually amplify the message of Reach Out and Read. This is a 4-year study where we're developing video and text messages, again, to reinforce the messages that the Reach Out and Read program promotes. Central to that is actually really seeking extensive community input, both from parents as well as community leaders. It's taking place at Chandler Health Center, and as Shilpa had mentioned, it's a largely low-income community, mostly Latino background, mostly from Mexican, largely immigrant population, a large percentage are Spanish-speaking or prefer Spanish. And so we're using mixed methods, and specifically using an intervention development framework. So we're really utilizing both quantitative and qualitative methods, both in the development of the intervention, but also in its assessment. So this is sort of a busy slide, but it just provides an overview of what the 4-year study is going to look like. So in phase 1, it's really, again, using qualitative methods to seek parent input in the development of the video and text messages. In phase 2, we'll do some user testing, which we're actually in the process of doing right now. And then eventually we'll do, hopefully later this year, we'll actually conduct a randomized control trial where we test the enhanced intervention compared to the standard Reach Out and Read intervention. At least currently looking at frequency of shared reading occurrences as the primary outcome. Hopefully actually extending it later to developmental outcomes both language and literacy development. So I'll just share over the next few slides some of the work that we've been doing with parents and with community leaders in the development of the enhanced reach on read intervention. So we've used a variety of qualitative methods, ethnographic interviews, depth interviews, as well as focus groups to help develop that. Ethnographic interviews, we use the approach recommended by Bradley, really based on the premise that much of culture can actually be coded in language. So it involves intense repeated exposures or interactions with a key informant or key informants. And it's really a way to sort of understand or to gain a comprehensive understanding of patterns that are associated with the group's culture. And specifically in this case, we were interested in parenting culture in New Brunswick. So we spent some time in the local daycare center with the director of the daycare center. In addition to sort of the 4 1-hour interviews that we did with the community leader, we also spent a lot of hours just being there and observing parents and observing children and sort of attending different events. So which really sort of opens it up beyond just the clinical experience that folks like Shilpa and I typically experience. And really, we were able to leverage that information that we gained to really inform the series of interviews that we then conducted with parents. And so it did that in multiple ways. I mean, most obviously in how we sort of framed the interview guide, moving away from just thinking about barriers to shared reading amongst Latino parents, to actually thinking about how does reading actually fit into the broader context of parenting more generally. And also, another sort of really neat way that these interviews influence the project is really making us rethink sort of our outcome measures as well, and thinking about really including social emotional outcomes as one of the primary outcomes that we'll evaluate once we get to the randomized control trial. The series of interviews that we did with parents took place in a Chandler Health Center. We purposely sampled parents who were Spanish speaking, mostly mothers, actually almost exclusively mothers, of children aged less than 3 years old. All the interviews actually took place in Spanish. And we transcribed them and coded them in Spanish. Just in terms of just a quick overview, sort of our analytical approach. Each of the transcripts were first coded by 2 team members, myself and our research assistant. And then we first sort of treated each interview individually, and then eventually compared across interviews. And not bringing in an a priori framework, but actually allowing the themes to emerge from the data. So an editing coding approach. And then we sought this confirming evidence within the interviews and collected additional data until we knew new themes were identified, so thematic saturation. And then we utilized focus groups actually to do member checking to assess the trustworthiness or provide some quality assurance to our conclusions. So we identified multiple themes, but 2 of the ones that I really wanted to focus on, which actually are things that we've really incorporated into the intervention development, is one, the notion that parents expressed of feeling they ought to be reading but aren't, and the other one was treating reading as instruction or drills or sort of a highly structured process as opposed to more of a relaxing, enjoyable process. So with the theme of I ought to, but I don't, this is one of the quotes that one of the parents shared. So because if one would dedicate a half hour to reading every day to the kids, it'd be great for them because they would not be battling as much in school. They would be fine, but one does not do it. And then with regards to the sort of structured drills, I do have time, although there are times that I do not want to stick to a book and read it to him. But like I tell you, in occasions when I can or when I have the will, because I do not have, say, its will, so then I sit with him and I make him read, and I make him paint or with them both, and they or we are. I have a board on the wall, and sometimes I put the colors, the letters, and I start reading, not reading, but saying the letters or saying the colors and like that. And so this is a 1.5-year-old child. So, I'm thinking of my 3 boys. I can't imagine what that would be like. Certainly not an enjoyable experience. And the reason why I think, or why we think these messages are actually important is, oftentimes when we're thinking about interventions, and I think from a healthcare perspective, we're sort of notorious in doing these kind of things, like, lose weight or eat healthy. So sort of broad prescriptions that don't really assess sort of, what is the context, and really how do we sort of facilitate this behavior or facilitate this goal. And so, in many ways, we may be falling into this trap in terms of the way we approach recommending shared reading, where contrary to sort of the belief of some, families, at least in our sample, have really recognized that shared reading is an important thing for their child and can actually promote their readiness. It's a matter of really figuring out how do we help them do that and help them to achieve that. And so, and along the same lines, sort of reframing it from doing, instructions on the blackboard to really finding an opportunity to just share time with your child and bond. So we're now, as I mentioned, we're in the process of, we have a first draft of the video and the text messages, so we're piloting them with families, and we'll be piloting it a little bit. We'll have to do a second pilot later this spring, and then hopefully we'll start the randomized control trial sometime this summer. This last project is one that's run, that's being led by one of our medical students, where she actually went out and interviewed residency program directors to understand what literacy promotion education looks like in residency programs. So again, the goal here was to understand how literacy promotion training is currently being implemented in residency training programs, and also understanding barriers to implementation. So we actually interviewed all the residency program directors and a couple of associate program directors. And so we followed the same approach that I described earlier with our depth interviews with parents in terms of our analysis process. Like I said, all of the residency programs were represented in our interviews. The emerging themes from this study are the challenge of balancing resident education and clinical service obligations. Not unlike training residents in anything, the balance between what they do in the hospital and what they do in outpatient settings that help sort of move patients along and help get patients seen, in contrast to sort of their educational experience and their didactic training. And then also, as opposed to incorporating into some of the more standardized aspects of the training, it really does sort of get delegated to primary care providers. Depending on whether you're assigned to a primary care provider who feels literacy is important, you may or may not receive any training in literacy promotion. And the other thing that we really heard was the importance of reach on read. And so not only just from the perspective of what it does for parents and families, but then also as part of the education process for residents. We've really, like I mentioned before, have tremendously benefited from the support of Lesley and also others. And then I'll hand it over to Lesley.
Thank you so much. I hope I can keep to my time like you guys did and speak as fast. It's actually a joy for me to work with these guys because the whole concept of literacy is what I'm about, and that the fact that they value what I do is important to me. I began working on this with Dr. Alan Mendelson from NYU with Reach Out and Read, and I had been invited to speak at a conference, and he came up to me and said he was using a lot of my work to sort of create his Reach Out and Read program, which is a little bit different than Shilpa and Manny talked about, because he wanted to add to it and make it even stronger than it was. The other thing that's so important is collaboration between different disciplines, because then they both become richer. Ultimately, in the collaboration, I don't think I've sent this to you, but because of the work that Manny talked about, where really pediatricians and resident programs are not doing a lot. And there needs to be, from my perspective, an actual module or something or other where it is definitive that they get some kind of training. So in the back of my mind there is, okay, there's got to be a little thin book that's called Literacy for Pediatricians, and some sort of module that someone's in charge of, and they actually do this. So I'm going to talk about some earlier work that I worked on with Alan Mendelsohn, who's extremely well known in the field for his work and his research, which typically is an experimental design with large random samples. And in the office, this is what you're supposed to see in the waiting room, that there is someone reading to children. We have Reach Out and Read volunteers here who actually do that and model what good reading is. So the work that I did with Alan was, again, the Reach Out and Read, where the baby comes into the doctor's office, the unwell child visits, and they're given a book, and Alan also did a toy, a learning kind of toy. And part of it was to help the parents understand that the interchange of language was so important. And that would be for reading to the children and also language development. And this very quickly shows you how many children that he worked with in his experimental and control. He called it the Video Interactive Program, and you'll see in a minute why. So the routine was to read to the child, to expose the child to books and the parents. It's a parent-child kind of thing. And compare with regular Reach Out and Read to an extended kind of interaction with an educational specialist, and you'll see what I mean. And it is something like what Manny is trying to do, except what your work is more sustainable than Alan's work, when you think about it. Because he has to hire and have a grant and money to get this educational specialist in the room. So those are the kinds of toys that are given to the children. And again, you need to get them and have grants, you know, to get them, as well as books. So dramatic play was very important in Alan's work, as well as reading to children. And this is after the Well Baby exam, and this is an educational specialist sharing with the mom books and how they can read it to the babies. It was called Video Interactive because they videotaped the parent reading to the child and playing with the child, and they gave the video to the parent to look at it and learn from it, and they were able to take that home. This is a sequential video of showing a baby at, you'll have to tell me, I think she's maybe 2 months, and up to when she's 2. And there's tiny little clips. Watch the mom and how she changes in this, as well as the baby. In the first teeny clip, it's a mom and the grandmother, who's not very helpful, actually. Let me do this again. Okay, here we go. She doesn't say anything for a couple of minutes. How old is that baby? Okay.
Adriana, tu mamá está tan feliz de verte que te quiere tirar fotos con ese vestido tan hermoso. Me encanta ver ese vestido. Sí, los zapatos. Sus zapatitos amarillos.
There she just said something to the baby. Your pretty shoes. Now she's trying to read to the baby, but watch she does. The mom's in the white shirt, and the grandma's in the gray. No? So there's a lot of misunderstanding. Watch the baby. Baby's kind of like, what's going on here? It's almost like, leave me alone. And And in some ways, she wants to look if you notice her head. The mom is very quiet. Okay, now we're going, now she's a year, I think. Now this is just the mom. Now she's talking more, but she's not talking to the baby. She's learned it's important to talk and interact, but she hasn't been doing it, and you can tell. Now she's older. Now she's talking to the baby. But notice she doesn't hold the baby. You know what I'm saying? She's kind of...
Eso es el Ponga ahí, acá. Caballito, caballito, guárdelo. Acá está el caballito.
Now this next clip, she's about huge difference with the mom.
Este es tu cuchillo amarillo. Dame la otra cuchara azul, dámela. Esa dámela. Tenedor azul lo puede marcar. Dame la cuchara azul. Cuchara azul. No.
There's a lot of interaction.
Solo la cuchara azul, yo quiero esa. Thank you, baby. A ver, ponga ahí su cuchara amarilla, ponga allá. Ponga ahí un cuchillito amarillo. Ahora siéntese que le voy a dar de comer. Siéntese que le voy a dar pollito. ¿Quiere pollito? ¿Quiere pollito, bebé? ¿Quiere pollito? Adriana. ¿Quiere Adriana? ¿Quiere pollito? Sí, mami, diga. ¿Tiene hambre? Ok, siéntese para darle de comer. A ver, un pollito para mi bebé. Cómase pollito.
Ay, qué rico, qué delicioso.
Córtelo.
Qué delicioso.
A ver, cómaselo. Cómalo.
Eso.
A ver, cómaselo.
Está delicioso ese pollo.
Adrianita, el pollo no se pone ahí, se pone en el platito. Le voy a dar un poquito de agua, ¿sí? ¿Quiere agüita? Juguito. Toma.
El vaso verde.
Brazo verde, tome. Toma. Tómala. Salud.
So a big difference there in the mom and the baby. So as I said, we get this extra person helping over a long period of time. And what happened was more of a verbal interaction, more talking about books, using books, interaction in play, enhanced provision of toys, improved school readiness. Also, what you were talking about, it reduced parenting stress and anxiety and depression, and also with children, reduced problems in the classroom. So I wanted to take this into a preschool. So I went to Mount Zion Preschool, which is right in New Brunswick, and we had 6 parent and child dyads, and actually 3 moms and 3 children and 3 dads and their children. And I did 6 sessions with each of them over a period of time, just like what you kind of saw, play and reading. And so this is Kevin and Joshay, and this is at one of their first sessions, where Kevin is very much aloof and away. She's got a basket of fruit, but by the end, she was actually writing down, the fruit. This is towards the end where, they're cuddling together and they're really interacting. And she loved it when her father came. Sometimes he didn't, and she was really disappointed. He once called, I mean, it's hysterical, and he says he was getting his dreadlocks done, and so he wasn't going to get there in time. But anyway, they were a really nice success story, and I want you to watch them. This goes from beginning to end. This is first session and last.
That's 6 each, said Sam and Victoria. They look as good as Grandma, said Victoria. They smell as good as Grandma, said Sam. No one makes cookies like Grandma. said Mom. Said,
Now watch her. She gets very stiff and upset.
no one's made cookies like Grandma, said Ma as the doorbell rang. It was Tom and Hannah from next door. Come in, said Ma. You can share the cookies. That's Tom
How he
and Hannah
looks at
right
the
there.
book.
She was right. I don't know why they got them up there. It's crazy. That's 3 each, said Sam and Victoria. They smell as good as your grandma, said Tom. What type of book is this? Like he repeating everything over and over.
All right, so we're going to laugh at it, but it's clear he's never been read to. And so he doesn't understand children's books or exactly what to do. Oh, I'm sorry, I turned them off before I got to the part that's really good. And how do I push it ahead to the end? Oh.
That's 6 each, said
I
Sam and
wanted to show
Victoria.
you, the part where he
They look as good as Grandma, said Victoria.
changed, but,
They smell as good as Grandma, said Sam.
well, you have to watch it again. It's short. I'm sorry. I don't know why.
No one makes cookies like Grandma, said Ma. Said,
Video is so telling.
no one's made cookies like Grandma, said Ma as the doorbell rang. It was Tom and Hannah from next door. Come in, said Ma. You can share the cookies. Shit, that's Tom and Hannah right there. She was right. I don't know why they got them up there. It's crazy. That's 3 each, said Sam and Victoria. They smell as good as your grandma, said Tom. What type of book is this? Like he repeating everything over and over.
So this is the last session.
They all work day and night. All except Frederick. Frederick is lazy. You don't want to be lazy, right? If you see it, my house working, you
See
want
how
to
much more talking he's doing to her?
Frederick, why don't you work there? I do work, said Frederick. I got a sun raise for the cold
He
guard of
loves
the
the
day.
book.
Just like we doing.
And she's engaged with him.
See, right. And when they saw Frederick sitting there staring at the meadow, they said, and now, Frederick, we got the colors. Answered.
So this was mostly an ethnographic kind of study where we observed and described. This is another dad. He took control over everything. He didn't let his little boy do anything, but that was at the end. And, they're working together. And also beginning reading, again, not, engaging the child. And here is at the end where he is. And there's a whole change in the child as well. This is another dyad where, again, he's on the couch. He's now down on the floor but not doing anything, and here he is. So there was definitely a change in behavior. So, again, with these books, the parents learned more about how to read to the children. There was more verbal interaction, and it was quite exciting to watch this. So reach out and read, and we wanted to do something, and this is Chandler. And so I met Manny, and then I met Shilpa, and we decided that the clinic should have a literacy center. And so this is what it looked like, generally looks like. And generally people are sitting there with their telephones. If you look closely, everyone has a phone there. It's a little boy, and you can see the cell phone. And that's basically what's happening, or the TV is on. This is the space we're going to use, okay? You see that long space? And there it is again. And then with Eileen, who is an administrator in my center, as well as Lisa, who's over there, we made magic. This is what it looks like now. And so let me just show you again. It's very exciting. Immediately, the children came, And the people who work in the clinic came to look at them and said, oh, I read that. And yes, they put the books in their mouth, and that's how they learn about everything. So it's fine. And the mom says, take it out, but you want to say, no, you can't take it out. And again, the mom gives the child the book, but doesn't interact. And so we want to get, and look at the face on this little one. And, you know, this was just when we got there and they were doing it. He's about 9, and he took a book, and Shilpa gave this little one a book. And then he went over, and the 9-year-old is reading to this little one over there. So I've been told by Shilpa that it's a very popular place, and that the parents are taking books as well as the children. And there's going to be signage and little rocking chair and tables. And I really believe there's a big study in observing these children and parents and what is going on there. This is not just for at-risk families. The first year of my grandson's life, my daughter asked me to go to the pediatrician with her every month. Now this is middle upper class, well-educated community. The doctor didn't say anything about reading to your child, anything about language. It was all about nutrition and sleep and motor development. So my daughter is an attorney, and I said to her, baby's a month, 2 months old, you know, are you reading to James? And she said, well, I started, but he just hits the book and doesn't. This is an educated woman, okay? It's different when you know, and it isn't just common knowledge. And so it needs to be everywhere. It's not because she's not a good mother or didn't, you understand what I'm saying? Anyway, thank you very much.
Great. Questions?
Hi. So I have a couple of questions. One, I know this is, fear this is being taken the wrong way. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. But there's a bit of an underlying deficit in your parents of different cultures. And I think what's interesting is something that was said about the parents who can't actually read. And the idea is like, okay, well, just take a book and make a story. So then my question is, the benefit here from storytelling, which is a prevalent kind of practice in some cultures, or is it the reading? Because if it's storytelling on some level, couldn't we help them promote the kinds of practices they might be more familiar with, rather than, I'm not saying don't push the reading, I think that there's clearly a benefit to the reading. But what that dad said, I would have had the same response on that book.
It's talking about the pictures too, just understanding that it's something that you do together with language interaction, and introducing them to the concept of book and talking. I think that storytelling is really important, and you're right, it's part of so many cultures, and that should be done as well.
Sorry.
But the book introduction, but I feel strongly about having the physical look. You guys want to answer?
So actually, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, go.
I was just going to say, with that family, I did actually say the importance of storytelling too.
One of my students will tell me, no, I'm not listening.
Well, I want to add also that I think, what it's standing for on a meta level is that there are representations that stand for things.
Right.
And that representational perspective is important. Images represent things, words represent things, and that's the key, that's the reason we read to them so early.
The other thing is this program is also interested in making children school ready. And most of these children are not school ready when they get to be 5 years old. And so they're